I'm Chris Tuck, a financial advisor, CFP, with a passion for educating my clients about investing. My father-in-law, Scott Kleiman, founded the practice, and together with my wife, Lindsay, and amazing staff, we are making a place to feel more at home with investing. This is Advisors in Cars Getting Coffee. Today, we're going out with Paul Cohen. He is an estate attorney at Curtin & Hefner, located in Doylestown and Yardley. They're a full-service law practice. We're going to be picking Paul up in a brand new BMW 330i. Paul helps craft estate plans for clients and has worked with many of our clients in coordinating their estate plan with their financial plan.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey Chris.
Ready to go?
Yep. Ready to go.
This is a 2018 BMW
Nice.
330i.
Great. So I've not been to Aunt Judy's before. Either way. I went there with Lindsay just to see it.
Familiar with the courthouse, right?
I have often almost gotten hit here, yes. I did not realize that's where we were coming through. How's it working out for the courthouse? Good. As far as I know, yeah. I mean, you know, it's just a much better facility. The judges have their own courtrooms, so you're not bouncing around as much. It's just a nicer layout.
That is not the one I froze the car in. Very simple.
Yeah, can't wash a car in 7 degrees.
There'll be plenty of people here who need estate work.
Oh, excellent.
Right. Here we are.
All right.
Paul, thanks for coming out today and having some coffee with us. I thought maybe we could start with the basics, just really talking about the differences between financial planning and estate planning.
So the way I see it, financial planning, you guys are really focusing on a person's life. You know, what assets do they have? How are they investing those assets? Planning for eventualities during their life, and ultimately, you know, planning for retirement. For estate planning, it sounds a little grim, but we're really looking for what happens after the person's gone. You know, what happens after death. They call us death lawyers for a reason. You know, we're looking to see what happens with their assets, who takes care of their estate, who takes care of their children. That's really part of the estate planning process. So I think there's a lot of work to be done between us, but I think there are two different focuses there.
Sure, and when I think of financial planning, it's more of, you know, we're hoping our clients live a very nice long life, and there's the risk of them running out of money.
Sure.
So we've got to do our job to make sure that the money lasts, and hopefully there is an estate to pass along.
Right.
But there's also a lot of overlap. So for example, if we're opening a retirement account for a client, we want to make sure their beneficiaries are in line with their estate plans. And a lot of times we see a gap in planning, that clients aren't necessarily having their estate planners talk with their financial planners.
I love when a client comes to me and they're with a financial planner and there's somebody else for me to work with, because it's a project, and you can work with people. For financial planners, you know, part of my job is to collect information, and the financial planners usually have a much better idea of what assets are out there and how things are held, but it's also a collaboration in the sense of the plan. You know, sure, I could prepare some estate planning documents, but as you said, beneficiary designations have to be updated. Titling of assets might have to be changed, and that's where you guys really come into play here to make sure that gets done, because a lot of times it might not.
Paul, what are the most common mistakes or issues you encounter with estate planning?
I'd say one of the biggest mistakes is people just don't do it. It always surprises me when I have clients who might be sophisticated and organized in every other aspect of their life, but just never got around to it. And I understand that it's a difficult conversation to have, but a lot of people just don't want to deal with it. So I think the biggest mistake is not doing it. The next biggest is doing it and just letting it sit. You know, I get clients who drafted or prepared wills 40 years ago. It really is something you have to stay on top of. You know, the person who was a good fit for guardian of your children when your kids were 2 and 3 years old might not be the same people when the kids are 14 and 15 years old.
So I think we're always very surprised by the lack of planning we see in estate planning when clients come in. You know, we'll ask, you know, do you have a will? And a lot of times the answer is no. And just a lot of our clients were really surprised at the lack of estate planning.
Yeah, and it's not just not having a will. I mean, I've seen people who, they really haven't thought about the future and what happens after in any way. And, like I said, it's the will and it's beneficiaries, and you have to think through life insurance and all these things. And a lot of people just really don't put a lot of time into it.
Sure. So I would imagine a lot of the people watching right now probably haven't done their estate planning, or maybe haven't even revisited it in a while.
Sure.
So maybe as just a public service announcement, what are the basic documents that everyone should have and keep up to date?
Sure. So, look, everybody should have a will. What a will does is it directs what happens after you're gone. It decides where your assets go. It decides who's going to take care of things. If you have young children, it determines who's going to be their guardian. A will is sort of the basic document that everybody really should have. But on top of that, part of the process is preparing powers of attorney for people. So I usually want to make sure folks have a general power of attorney that gives somebody the ability to take care of their financial affairs if they become disabled or unable to care for themselves, and also a healthcare power of attorney. A lot of people call it a living will, which has nothing to do with a will, but it basically says, look, if I'm in the end of my life and I can't decide what happens with my care, this is what I want happening. And then sometimes trust might come into play as well. So, like I said, the wills, powers of attorney, everybody really should have that.
Right. We'll talk about trust a little bit. There's a lot of confusion out there. So there's a lot of services out there that are marketed as kind of like the DIY, do-it-yourself version of estate planning.
Yeah.
And I think it'd just be good for you to talk about why should someone maybe consider using an estate attorney, a professional, versus some online or template type of service.
Somebody could go online and pay $50 or $100 and they can get a will, and it'll be a legal valid document. When you come to me, yes, you'll have documents at the end, but that's not the product. The service you're getting is advice. The service you're getting is going through a process with me. I've been doing this for over 15 years. I've done estate planning for hundreds of people. And in that time, you get experience, you see different situations. Almost every aspect of an estate plan really has to be thought out. And what you're not going to get from those services where you basically fill in the blanks online is the advice, to what should you consider? For me, the greatest thing I hear from my clients is when they say to me, I never thought about that. If they're saying I never thought about that, then I've done my job. I've made them think about something that they really should be thinking about. So you're not going to get that from the DIY services.
Right. Yeah, Paul, I like that, we're all in the advice business.
Sure.
And I think that differentiation between advice and the process of giving advice is really key in what you're saying.
So, Paul, let's talk about trust. There's a lot of confusion about trust.
Yeah, I mean, trusts in general, I think in some ways they're overused. A lot of people use them as an alternate to wills, and I don't think they're necessarily a good idea in that case. There are plenty of times where trust makes sense.
Right.
If you've got a married couple and maybe one of them has an inheritance that they want to specifically direct to the kids, a trust might make sense. If you own real estate outside of Pennsylvania in another state, a trust might make sense. But just generally, a living trust, one that's funded and created during your life, doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense all the time.
I know one of the issues that we see pretty often, and it's an unfortunate thing, is clients come to our practice and they've been named the executor, or they've been named a trustee, and they really just have no idea what to do. And it's usually after some type of loss, and it's a really tough process because there's no executor school, there's no trustee school, and clients are really confused of that process. What kind of advice do you have for those people?
I know it sounds self-serving, but the first thing they really should be doing, and one of the first things, is talking to an attorney.
Right.
It's a big deal. To become an executor or trustee, you're taking on a significant obligation. You're becoming a fiduciary, and you are exposing yourself to liability. You are responsible for paying taxes and investing assets and managing what could be a substantial amount of funds for somebody else's benefit. One of the first things I always tell clients when they come in that situation is that they're not obligated to do it. Even though a family member or friend has named them as an executor, they're really not legally obligated to do it. Now, they may feel a personal or moral obligation to do it, but sometimes circumstances change and maybe it just doesn't make sense for them to do it. But once they do decide to do it, they really have to understand what the risks are and what their obligations are. So really, more than almost in any other situation involving estates, I really think that's where somebody needs to get some professional advice from an attorney.
That's good advice.
So, Paul, at a high level, what does it look like for an executor? What's their role?
So what are they doing? You got to get the original will, you got to get a death certificate, you bring a petition to the court to file for letters. Once you do that, there are notices that need to be sent out, there's a certification that needs to be filed, you may have to send notices.
All right, wait. That's a lot of work. I get it. Sounds like a big job.
Yeah, and that's where you really, I think you do need the advice to be able to make sure that you do everything that you need to do.
Okay.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about taxes in regards to estate planning. And I think a lot of confusion comes up. I think most people understand that there's a pretty high federal exemption before you pay estate taxes at the federal level, multi-million dollars. But I think the state rules are where we see a lot of confusion with clients. So maybe you could talk about, state-specific rules.
Yeah, I mean, just on the federal one, it's 11.4 million or 22.8 for a married couple. So, yeah, there's a high threshold there. But for state taxes in Pennsylvania, the inheritance tax applies to all assets except for life insurance. And if you're under 59 and a half, your retirement accounts are not subject to tax. But for everything else is taxed. And for transfers to kids, it's taxed at 4.5%. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but on a sizable estate, that could really add up. Transfers to other people, if you're transferring assets to your siblings, it's 12%. If you're transferring to other people, nieces and nephews or friends, it's 15%. So it really can add up.
Wow.
There are things that can be done during life, and this is where, speaking with the financial planner really comes into play, because maybe you start funding, paying for a grandchild's college. You start making gifts during your life to try to reduce the size of the estate to reduce those taxes. If you're looking at a 4.5% tax, what are you going to, how much are you going to do to avoid that? But if you're really looking at higher amounts, planning comes into play, and there are things you might want to consider doing.
Sure. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you coming out today and spending some time with us. I hope our clients and people watching have considered their estate plans and are coordinating that with their advisors, and at least keeping that conversation open.
Yep.
Because it's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, I thank you.